Hola, buenos días. Bienvenidos todos a la 11ª conferencia del ciclo de sostenibilidad y queremos daros la bienvenida a todos. Seguro que va a ser muy interesante. Este ciclo de conferencias que inauguramos en 2020 nos ha permitido conocer a algunos de los líderes en activismo medioambiental. Cada día somos más conscientes que como sociedad tenemos un gran reto por delante y que la solución pasa por el compromiso de todos. Hoy le vamos a dar voz a Global Footprint Network, un grupo de expertos independientes que promueven la sostenibilidad a través de contabilizar la huella ecológica y la biocapacidad. Su metodología de contabilidad ambiental permite medir las consecuencias para el planeta de las acciones humanas. Es una de las iniciativas más ambiciosas para responsabilizar a cada país, a cada industria y, por supuesto, a cada persona sobre el impacto de sus actos en el deterioro o conservación del planeta, algo esencial, evidentemente, para todos. Con nosotros tenemos hoy a su director científico, Alessandro Galli, que nos va a hablar desde la preciosa localidad italiana de Siena. Y Galli, quien ha contribuido a desarrollar la metodología y las publicaciones de la huella ecológica y ha consolidado el sistema de contabilidad ambiental que hoy se está usando a nivel global. Alessandro Galli es doctorado en Ciencias Químicas por la Universidad de Siena, es autor de diversos artículos como Tendencias en la huella ecológica del Mediterráneo o Management y recursos naturales. Sin más preámbulo, quiero dar la bienvenida a Alessandro Galli y estamos impacientes por escuchar esa visión de la sostenibilidad que va a ser tan interesante. Alessandro, buenos días.
Good morning to you and good morning to everyone. As you mentioned, I work for Global Footprint Network, and we are offering an alternative way to look at the health and the well-being of our societies. So let's say alternative lenses, which are those of the ecological footprint and biocapacity accounting. So you may know our work at Global Footprint Network mainly through the Earth Overshoot Day. The Earth Overshoot Day is the day in the year in which we as humans have finished the resources of the year, the day in which we have used up all the natural capital for the year and we start to use, let's say, the assets available for the following year. So why this information is so important and what it means exactly? First of all, let me say that this day, which this year fall on the 28th of July, is our alarm call to the society, to the policymaker, but to all the individuals to shed light on the fact that something is not working properly in our relationship with the planet. And actually what this is indicating is that the rule of the game have changed. What I mean by this is that we have passed from a world that many will define as an empty world, which was full of resources and poor in man-made capital and in built capital, to a situation now which is characterized, which is defined as a full world economy, meaning a world in which the biosphere and the resources that the planet can produce, can offer for our use, are really becoming the limiting factor. Now, this visualization that I have put here on the screen is not just an opinion, is not just a qualitative statement, but there is meat behind it. This is a statement that is based on science. So those two, the green circle and the round and the red box that you see here can actually be measured. And by measuring them, what we see is that they have incredibly changed over the last 57 years, which is the time period that we observe. On one side, when we look at the supply of resources, the green line, we see that over the past 57 years, we have managed to increase the amount of resources then we can extract from the planet. But at the same time, our demand for these resources, our ecological footprint has increased even faster, and we have accumulated over this period, you see here, a debt with our planet. The end result of all of this is that while in the 70s we were using about 70% of the natural capital available each year for us, we are now using the equivalent of almost 1.8 planet. Now, of course, we don't have an extra planet, but what this means is that the planet takes about 20 months to regenerate what we as humans consume in 12 months. So how can we exactly say this? So we can say this through our accounting system, the ecological footprint. Think at the ecological footprint as an ecological balance statement for the planet. We are actually calculating two different indicators. On one side, the biocapacity, which is the supply of resources on the planet, how many renewable resources and ecological services are available to us every year, and on the other side, we measure the ecological footprint, the demand for these resources. So our ecological footprint is actually composed of all these categories that we see on the right side of the screen. In fact, every year we consume food and fiber, and in order to do this, we appropriate cropland, grazing land, and fishing grounds. At the same time, we use paper, we use timber for our goods and services, so we appropriate some forest space. We also occupy we paved over some surfaces for our cities and our infrastructure. And ultimately, in all our activities daily, we use fossil fuels, we use electricity, and so we put a demand on the planet capacity to sequester this CO2. Now, we are not the only one providing this information, of course, especially since the outbreak of the COVID pandemic. We have seen really a wealth of reports being published by UN organizations, national governments, but also NGO that are kind of indicating, pointing to the same story. And the story is unfortunately scary and quite simple. We are indeed in a vicious circle because our economic activities are contributing to degrading our environment. But by degrading our environment, we are in turn destroying the very foundation of our economic activities and of the well-being of our societies. So next to this global picture, what makes perhaps us unique at Global Footprint Network is that then we move this assessment down to the national level. So we provide this ecological balance sheet for individual countries, for all the individual countries on the planet over these almost 6 decades of time. And here you can see that back in 1961, most of the countries were characterized by a green color. When you see this green color, it means that those countries were characterized by a reserve of resources and ecological services. They were consuming less resources and services than those that they have available. In less than a lifetime, we have reached a situation in 2018, which is the latest year for which we have data, in which most of the population lives in this central area of the planet, which in which countries are characterized by an ecological deficit. On the right side of this slide, you see how the main daily activities, the consumption of food, goods, services, our mobility, and our housing needs play a role in determining the ecological footprint of European residents. So now I would like to dig a little bit more into national results, and specifically the results about Spain. So when we look at the biocapacity, meaning at the availability of resources for each average Spanish person, we see that over the last almost 6 decades, the amount of biocapacity has remained almost unvaried at about 1.2 hectares per person. But at the same time, during this period, the average demand of a Spanish person has increased a lot, going almost triple, going from slightly more than 2 hectares back in the 60s to almost 6 hectares per person in 2008, before then declining mostly because of the economic crisis that hit most of European countries around 2008. What it is important to show and to say here is that the development and the economic growth that Spain has experienced after the Second World War has actually happened at the expense of an increased pressure of the environment. And it is only through an economic crisis that Spain has been able, unfortunately, I would say, through the economic crisis, that Spain has been able to decrease its ecological footprint. This to say that this reduction in the ecological footprint has not happened by design because of more sustainable practices, but mainly by disaster because of the economic crisis. When we look at what make up or drives the footprint of Spain, we see that most of the increase in the ecological footprint is due to an increase in the carbon component of the ecological footprint, which is the area needed to sequester the CO2 emissions of the Spanish society. And this is mostly due to the increased industrialization and mechanization of the consumption profiles of Spain. And when we look in 2018 at what drives the ecological footprint, which daily activities contribute the most, we see food system, services, and personal transportation being the main driver. Here I want to just stress the fact that when I mention food is the entire food system, starting from the way in which food is produced, sourced, imported, like traded in general, and then consumed or wasted at home. Now, what is important to stress is that this situation that I have depicted, that our trends are depicting for Spain, is not peculiar just of Spain, but is actually common to many European countries. Here you see the curves of Spain next to those of Greece, France, Germany, Italy, and Portugal, and you see that are all characterized, except perhaps from France and Germany, but they are all characterized by this ecological deficit and an increased deficit up until the economic crisis of 2008. Now, what these, let's say, alignment of trends is telling us is that something has happened after the end of the Second World War that has completely changed the relationship of humans with the planet. Here you see a lot of curves and trends, socioeconomic trends and Earth system trends that are part of a study called the Great Acceleration. And you see an exponential growth after 1950s for most of these trends. So this is really the results to some extent of an economic obsession for growth that has driven most of our, the development of most of our economies, or at least I would say at the European level, in European societies. Now, something that I mentioned before, and I want to go back to this, is that destroying our environment, overusing the planetary resources is threatening the very foundation of our economic activities and of our well-being. And I want to come back to this specific point. Here, I have put next to each other our footprint and biocapacity trends with two other indicators. One is the GDP that we all know. The other is the genuine progress indicator. A genuine progress indicator is a sort of green GDP, is a better measure of the actual quality of life of people that is due to economic transactions. So what you see here is that increase in the material throughput, which is actually GDP, and the increase in the well-being of people have gone in parallel up until the 70s. But at one point, which is actually the same point in which we started to go into overshoot globally, these two curves started to diverge. So we have kept consuming more resources and growing the size of our economy, but the well-being of people has actually stagnated or even decreased. So this is really a sign and an indication that the economic growth that was a very strategic and working, functioning strategy to increase the quality of life up until the 70s is no longer the best strategy to guarantee the well-being of people. Now, why this is the case? I think the underlying reason behind this is that the traditional economic theory doesn't recognize the role of ultimate means and ultimate ends. And this is, let's say, a very nice model that was conceived in the 70s by, I would say, the most famous ecological economist that has ever lived on this planet, Herman Daly. So basically, classical economic theory focused primarily on what is the built capital, the human capital, and how much economic growth and wealth and leisure and communication we can have by using these intermediate means, but is to some extent blind or ignoring the fact that the intermediate means, the labor, tools, factories, they all depend on the natural capital of our planet. So the solar energy, the biospheres, the biogeochemical cycles, the earth materials. And these are the new lenses that we bring to the table with the ecological footprint. We want to shed light on the fact that on, let's say, the link between the ultimate means and the intermediate means, the fact that most of our economies really rely and depend on the natural capital of the planet. That's why it's so important to establish this link. Now, recognizing all of these put us in front of a challenge. We are called right now to redesign our society and align our decision-making processes, whether it is the daily decisions of every one of us or the political decision, the decision of policymakers, of business leaders. We are really called on realigning this decision with the reality of the world around us. We can no longer escape the reality of the fact that we live on one planet. We only have one planet available, and this planet is changing because of our activities. So recognizing this implies, to some extent, a big societal transition. It means giving the right credit and value to the natural capital of the planet, and most importantly, shift our approach and mindset in the definition of policies from what has been the traditional cost-benefit analysis. We do something at the expense of something else, and we have always been confronted with the issue of, do we need to develop the economy or do we need to protect the environment? So we need to move away from this idea or this mindset of cost-benefit and rather embrace a co-benefit approach, looking at those interventions that are beneficial not only for the economy, but also for the health of the planet and for the well-being of people. And I have been lucky enough, I have to say, to be involved in this report produced last year by the Wellbeing Economy Alliance that start to highlight and define the possibilities for co-beneficial approaches in different areas of our societies. Now, next to these major, let's say, paradigm shift, we can also start retrofitting our societies, and we can start doing this from three important intervention points. And with this, I'm going to close my, my speech. First of all, these three are food, energy, and mobility. At Global Footprint Network, we have spent the last 2 years trying to compile and put together a series of solutions, alternative lifestyles, and alternative development model that work at local level and that scaled up, if scaled up globally, could really help us transition our society towards sustainability. You can find all of these in our website, overshootday.org, but here you see the top 3 solutions that I have identified per each area. So the role of reducing food waste, shifting towards a more plant-based diet, producing meat through regenerative agricultural practices. You see all of these will also will contribute to postponing the overshoot day by almost a month. On the energy side, scaling up globally the production of electricity through renewable energy, the retrofitting of buildings, and putting a price on carbon emissions would contribute to almost other 3 months of delay in the overshoot day. And finally, mobility is also a key aspect. It is a matter of promoting, let's say, different type of mobility, car sharing or the use of bike, but it's also a matter of reshaping, redesigning our cities so that they are more compact and that avoid from start the need to travel and to commute every day. And this is, again, almost another month. I would like to close just to say that on our website, you can find several resources and data about the ecological footprint of all countries of the world. And you can also access our personal footprint calculator through which you can calculate your own ecological footprint. And that's it from my side for now. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, Alessandro. Muy interesante esa exposición y esa visión de la huella, de la repercusión de la huella ecológica. Para abrir fuego un poco con el debate, has dado unos datos sobre España realmente interesantes, ¿no? Hablabas de estas últimas 6 décadas en las que apenas había habido grandes movimientos en España, pero que luego la situación pues se ha disparado en España y también un poco en el mapa europeo, decías tú, se salvaba un poco Alemania y Francia. A mí me gustaría que profundizaras un poco en ese comportamiento de la línea, en esa manera, en ese tema que tú has comentado tan interesante de cuando a partir de los años 70 la sociedad tenía un bienestar que iba un poco acompasado a un buen comportamiento de sostenibilidad y luego esa situación, esa línea diverge de una manera completa. ¿Cuáles son las causas reales, más allá de esa voluntad y ese deseo de crecimiento después de la Segunda Guerra Mundial que tú comentabas? Me parece un planteamiento súper interesante eso que decías.
Yes, okay. Of course, we are entering in a very difficult conversation and topic that requires many different competencies. So I'm trying to offer, let's say, my view of the situation, which is, let's say, informed by the biophysical reality of the planet more than the economic construct. Okay, because in my view, one thing is like the reality of the planet, and this is different from the economy. The economy is something that we have created as humans and that we can shape. Now, my interpretation is the following. Immediately after the Second World War, there was a need for reconstruction and like building up again our societies. So the strategy through which almost all Western countries, let's say high-income countries, have decided to do this is by increasing, like growing the size of the economy, okay? But growing the size of the economy should be a strategy through which we achieve something that is of higher importance than just economic growth. And this is the well-being of people. So we have used the strategy of economic growth to increase the quality of life of people. No problem up until this point, of course. Then the point is, and this is again my reading, that growing the size of the economy has shifted from being the strategy through which we improve the quality of life of people to become our ultimate goal. So we have entered in this vicious circle in order, according to which, in order to sustain the economy needs to grow more and more. So really, like, growth in the size of the economy has become what drives the daily activities, the annual planning of most countries. But what we are seeing is that this increase just in the size of the economy is not improving the quality of life of people anymore. Many of us have, let's say, impossible working hours. They have no longer free time. And basically, we are decreasing what is the wealth that we have, or at least not increasing it anymore. So what I'm arguing here is that while economic growth has been, up until maybe 2-3 decades ago, the best strategy for our European societies to increase the quality of life, now it is no longer the case. And that's why we need to rethink the economic system. Now, how do we rethink this economic system? I don't have all the answer because I am like a physical scientist. I'm not like an economist. But to me, and again, I want to quote Herman Daly because he recently passed away, and so I think it's good to bring back his ideas to the table. We need perhaps to start thinking at the idea of a steady state economy, an economy that doesn't grow in the size, but grows in the quality of the services that are provided to people. And I will stop again here.
No, me parece fascinante porque mucha gente que nos estará escuchando, muchas personas, y puedo estar muy de acuerdo contigo, Alessandro, pero da la sensación de que, por ejemplo, la sociedad de los años 70, aunque tenía un crecimiento económico menor del que tenemos en la actualidad, pues vivía más feliz. O tenía elementos que le podían hacer más feliz. En España y en Europa, ¿no? Según tu teoría. ¿Le podemos decir a la gente que lo que vivía en los años 70 y primeros 80 era mejor que lo que tiene ahora? En términos globales, no económicos solo.
Well, I would say maybe answering this question 3 years ago would have been
Alessandro,
more difficult. But right now, I mean, look at what we have around us. Okay, so in a sequence, we are having first the COVID outbreak, then the Russia invasion of Ukraine, and now like the climate emergency and the biodiversity emergency, which many scientists are indicating are way more life-threatening than COVID and the invasion of Ukraine. So really, I mean, do we see the world around us as way better than 30 years ago? I think if we ask to most of the youth right now, we see cases of anxiety and depression in the young generation. They don't see a future. So actually, I was very young in the 70s, or actually almost like barely born, so it's hard for me to remember. But when we think at the ages of immediately after the war, like 50s and 60s in Italy, it was really a moment of big economic boom. Like the expectations that people had were of a better future. Right now, the expectations that we are not of a better future. Our expectations, daily expectation of a worsening future. So, I don't know. Of course, we can find indicators that tell us that we were poorer and we were living shorter life back then, and we can prove the opposite. But we can also find indicators that are proving that our happiness and quality of life was indeed possibly higher a few decades ago.
Hablabas tú en tu exposición de que el bienestar de las personas va a la baja, un poco lo que estabas explicando ahora, ¿no? En líneas generales, cosa que me ha sorprendido mucho escucharte una afirmación tan severa, ¿no? En este sentido, ¿no? Y la has explicado perfectamente. Y comentabas la necesidad de ir a una transición social en Europa especialmente, ¿no? Hablabas del co-beneficio. Me gustaría, si pudieras explicar un poquito más los componentes que debería aglutinar esa nueva tendencia que debería hacernos económicamente fuertes, pero más felices de lo que lo somos en la actualidad, con el co-beneficio.
Yes. Okay. So first of all, I want to pick up on well-being, because again, what is well-being? And I think this is a very subjective statement. Then, as I declared before, I am not an economist, so I don't know all the details that goes inside the calculation of that index of sustainable economic welfare that I was showing before, or like the genuine progress indicator, how it is better defined in my graph. But the point is, if we look, for instance, at our society, I want to make one example. Let's think at the rate of lack of employment that characterize most of the European societies. Now, in Europe, we have very high rates of unemployment, especially in the youth. There is a high unemployment rate. Now, the point that I want to make and where I want to arrive at is that we need to rethink really what are our values, because we have what we have seen over these, let's say, past decades. I want to make, a distinction between average values and extreme values. On average, if we look at indicators, we probably see that quality of life has increased. Employment may have increased, GDP per person is increased, but if we look at how these increased have characterized or have hit the society, we are going to see an extreme increase in inequalities. So the average has increased, but driven by huge widening of inequalities between, let's say, the lower income groups of our European societies and the higher income groups. So we are building a society that is increasingly unequal. So to me, this is not a better society, but is a worse society. So we really need to reflect on what we mean by well-being, and we need to start making changes. So if we look, for instance, and I know I'm probably deviating a bit here, but if we look at the rule, and again, to touch on the point of unemployment, like our rules of employment, the way in which we regulate employment was determined to some extent several decades ago, at a point in time in which we were less than half the people that we are right now on the planet. So at that time, human labor was a limiting factor, and it made total sense, for instance, to have 40 hours working week. Now, we are in a completely different game. There is more than double the amount of people that we had 50 years ago. And so these need to be followed by a change, again, to follow this example, in the employment rule. We need to reduce, for instance, the number of hours that we work and redistribute the wealth among people. So I think what I want to arrive at is the idea, at least put a question mark for who is listening us today of what is well-being. By working more and by having more money that sometimes we don't even have the time to spend, are we happier and are we living a better life than before? Please reflect on these. Now, on the co-benefit, what I mean by co-benefit are interventions, as I said before, that has multiple positive outcomes on the three most important fronts for me, which is the health of the planet, the quality of the economy, and the well-being of people. An easy example for me comes within the food sector. So what we are seeing is that in the Western societies, we have incredibly changed our diet in the past few decades. We have transitioned towards a diet that is richer in meat, in sugars, in pre-made meals, and in most cases, we are eating more calories that are empty calories, so that have lower nutrition values. This is causing huge consequences from the health point of view to people. And this is also causing a huge impact on the planet, because the food like meat products or sugars or highly processed products that are bad for the health of the people are also very bad for the environment, because they take more resources and they release more CO2 to be produced. So along the line of the co-benefit thinking, a shift of our production system and of our dietary choices towards a more, let's say, plant-based diet, so reducing the empty calories, reducing sugars, reducing meat, would lower the impact on the planet, will increase the health of the people, and there are many studies that are saying this. It's not just me like ranting on this interview, but will also lower, and again there are studies by the European Commission, will also lower the expense that central governments have in order to support the health system. So here I mean by co-benefit, a shift that will reduce the impact on the planet, that will increase the health of the people, and that will lower the cost for the health system. In the long run, of course, the point is like, where do we start with an intervention that will require some years to give, to yield the desired outcomes?
La apuesta por la sostenibilidad, que muchas veces la población mundial pues, ha pensado más en su beneficio personal y en el beneficio económico más que en el compromiso con el planeta. Antes estabas comentando que se puede dar la circunstancia de que lo que puede ser bueno para el planeta puede ser también bueno para el ciudadano de cualquiera de uno de los países. Ese binomio puede ser la clave para que la gente se comprometa más, aunque sea de rebote por el planeta.
Yes, I think so. I mean, this is something that really shocked me, let's say, as a relatively young person working on the environmental field, are two conversations that I have heard over the past years. So I think during the entire time of my studies, I always read and have been told of this dichotomy between protecting the environment and, let's say, ensuring economic growth, okay? As if these were two unreconcilable extremes. And then since 2 years ago, with COVID outbreak, at least in Italy, the public conversation has presented us yet with another dichotomy. Do we protect the economy and we keep, let's say, industries open despite the cases, and this was at the beginning of the COVID outbreak, or do we shut down businesses and industries in order to save life? So again, I was confronted with another dichotomy. Is the health of the people, or is, let's say, economic security, employment, and so on? So we have always, and I think this has not happened to me only, we are daily confronted with these extremes. Is either that or the other. And that's why I'm saying and what that we need to shift from these cost benefit, and we really need to identify what the co-benefits are, because that, I think, is a fundamental trigger for people. Realizing through education, probably not just at school, but like in lifelong education, that there are indeed things that we can do that works for the benefit of the three elements. One important thing to close this answer is that I'm not really sure how ready society is. I mean, often we make fantastic theoretical construct about like the need to look at nexus, to look at co-benefits, but what I think we don't know exactly and will deserve more investigation from social scientists exactly is like, how ready will our society be to a different societal setup in which we don't value just money, but we value the quality of life? Are we sure that we are all ready to be happy in this other or in this alternative framework? Because, I mean, from the personal point of view, I really put, let's say, the health of the community in front of my personal health and well-being. But I know that in many cases, we are also very selfish and we look at ourselves first. So I think it's really worth reflecting on whatever alternative view of the society we have, because it is for sure that we need to change something because the current model doesn't work anymore. Whatever is the alternative, we need to understand better what will be the level of acceptance by people.
En España, con la pandemia, se produjo un fenómeno bastante sorprendente, ¿no? De mucha gente que ha cambiado su lugar de residencia, o que tenía varios lugares de residencia y que está adoptando el modelo de vivir más tiempo en un sitio más pequeño en lugar de en las grandes ciudades. Hablo de Madrid, Barcelona, Valencia. Ese modelo, no sé si ocurre, ha pasado también en el resto de Europa, no sé si en Italia también se ha producido. Esa manera de actuar podría ser uno de los indicadores que tú estabas explicando ahora, de que la gente está buscando quizá puntos más de bienestar que de crecimiento económico, cuando antes solo se relacionaba bienestar con dinero en la cuenta corriente.
Well, I will say that there are several bits here and there that may be indicating that this is happening. There is an increasing movement towards, let's say, more rural areas or going back in small villages. As you said, we have seen in the tourism sector, for instance, really a boom in the outdoor tourism and like going more for say outdoor experiences type of tourism. But at the same time, we are also seeing some sudden shift back to what was the norm as the restriction measures lifted. So I don't know at this point really what, I think it's too early to draw a conclusion. I see mixed sign of a possible change, but also especially from, let's say, people, allow me to say, people in power, a desire to go back to the business as usual. Because we need to somehow accept the fact that doing things differently is more difficult than keep doing what we have always done. So I recently was discussing with a sociologist who told me something that is for me really, really eye-opening. I mean, we cannot force change. Change happens when a series of bricks that are necessary for the change to happen are put in place, and then change becomes inevitable. Now, if we are on this path towards inevitable change or not, it's not easy for me to say. What I can say is that when I look at our trends, I really think that this inevitable change is more urgent than ever. So I really hope that the bricks are aligning towards this inevitable change.
Alessandro, comentabas antes en tu exposición los tres grandes, como modelo de cambio, ¿no? Los tres grandes ejes de alimentación, energía y movilidad. En el caso de alimentación, estabas hablando del desperdicio alimentario como uno de los retos a subsanar. En España recientemente se ha aprobado una ley contra el desperdicio alimentario y cada vez hay más conciencia de evitar esa situación, pero ¿cuál es desde tu punto de vista, dentro del, ahora hablemos de alimentación, dentro del paquete de la alimentación, cómo debería actuar la sociedad para realmente darle un impulso notable a las tesis en favor de una sostenibilidad mejor?
Okay, let's look for 1 second in a very systemic way at the food system. Okay, so starting from where food is produced. So what we are working on a study right now, and something very important on food system at EU level. What we are seeing is that for many European countries, a good half, if not 3/4 of the food that is consumed in the country is imported from outside the border, the geographical borders of the country. Now, this is not necessarily a problem as long as you have the money to purchase this food. But think I don't know what has happened in Spain, but in Italy over the past months has been almost impossible to buy sunflower oil or, let's say, non-olive oil, other oils, and very difficult to access some of the products, cereals and agricultural products that comes from Russia and Ukraine. And we have seen all of us in the news, all the back and forth and the story with the cereals boats that were ready to leave the ports of Ukraine. So relying on outside resources is not necessarily a problem. You don't need necessarily to have the resources internally, but the more you rely on the external resources, the more, two consequences, the more pressure you put on ecosystems outside your boundaries, your geographical, let's say, border, and the more you expose yourself to these type of shocks, price increase or supply disruptions. So this is like a first intervention point, like where we source our food. And considering that associated to long supply chain, there is also emissions, carbon emissions associated with the supply chain. The second aspect to look is, again, in the production side, who is benefiting from the production of food? Now, many statistics are indicating that whenever we go shopping, for every euro that we spend on a food product, only about 30% goes to the primary producers, to the farmers. 70% goes to the chain. Okay, so again, here we are increasing again inequalities because those who are producing the food are not those who are getting the revenue from selling the food. Then we come to the issue of the mechanization of the practices. So not only the little revenue goes on the hands of the producers, but at the same time, what we see is that most of the production is centralized in a few big companies, and most of the production processes are highly industrialized. So changing these is also very important by shifting to regenerative practices. This is what I was mentioning before. Finally, we arrive at the point of how we consume food. Now, how we consume food in the Western societies, I would say three main elements. We waste too much. And I know, like Spain, the law that has been passed, but similar laws have been passed in France and Italy, for instance, to allow supermarket that before were trashing food at the end of the day, to allow now to donate this food to charities and other in need of food. In Italy, this was not possible up until a few years ago. So changing the amount of waste that we make, but also shifting what we eat in terms of quantities. We now know that we are eating too much, too many calories on average in European countries, and we are eating a diet that is too much unbalanced towards meat and processed food. So there is intervention in all these steps that are needed. And I think every one of us, depending on which, let's say, stage of the supply chain is located, can have his role by changing its own behavior. But of course, this has to be also coordinated within national policies.
Alessandro, estamos llegando ya al final de nuestro encuentro apasionante. Me gustaría hacerte una pregunta breve sobre la movilidad. La movilidad que siempre despierta tantas pasiones en favor y en contra en las grandes ciudades, en España, por supuesto. Imagino que en Italia, amantes también de los vehículos de 4 ruedas y de 2 ruedas. ¿Hacia dónde tienen que encaminarse las ciudades de Europa? Porque hay 2 sistemas, ¿no? Solo coches no es posible, prohibido los coches tampoco parece una vía viable. ¿Hacia dónde tienen que orientarse? ¿Más transporte público? ¿Un transporte público de más calidad? ¿Qué opciones verdaderas y reales podemos poner encima de la mesa?
Yeah, okay. I will say 2 things. And of course, with 2 things, it's not enough, no, to find a solution. But because there are clearly differences on how we can change mobility in urban area and how we can change mobility, or we must change mobility in rural areas. Like the needs and the level of technological development and infrastructure development is different. Now, if we focus on cities, I think there is, of course, the promotion of the public transportation is a fundamental aspect on how to change the mobility inside urban areas. But what I was mentioning or hinting at before is redesigning our cities so that there is no need to commute every day, or not as far as we are currently commuting. Now, retrofitting cities may not be that easy in old cities. Like in Siena, you can really like change that much. But in Siena, we also live in a reality in which it's the first historic historic center, like downtown, that was closed to traffic already in the 80s. Inside the city center, you can only walk, and only, let's say, small vans to bring supplies for shops, restaurants, and so on are allowed to go. But the rest of the people really move either by walking or with the public transportation. So this to say that it's very hard to retrofit existing cities, but we also need to realize that most of the population that we expect to have in between now and 2050 on the planet will live in cities that are yet to be built. So these cities can be designed to be very compact and to avoid big commuting among the sides of the city. And in terms of retrofitting, I think the idea of the super block that you have in Barcelona is actually a nice idea to take back some of the spaces of the city and enjoy again, like the city, not leaving it to cars, but to humans.
Pues Alessandro, hemos llegado al final. La verdad es que podríamos seguir charlando en favor de la sostenibilidad, porque son temas súper interesantes los que nos has puesto encima de la mesa, y quizá tengamos otra oportunidad en otro round que podamos abordar con la sostenibilidad. Te agradezco mucho tu presencia, igual que todas las personas que nos están viendo, y me gustaría despedir de esta manera esta 11ª sesión del ciclo de sostenibilidad que se realiza desde LaVanguardia. Buenos días, Alessandro.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.